The entrance was behind the oldest loom in the guild's founding hall, a massive Iroko frame that had not been used for weaving in living memory, preserved as a relic, dusted every week by apprentices who treated it the way soldiers treat a decommissioned cannon, with respect for what it had been and no understanding of what it could still do. Above them, the looms of Tamale were waking up. Through the stone floor of the founding hall, Tibijia could feel the vibration of 100 looms beginning their day's work. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of shuttles passing through warp, the percussion of beaters pressing weft into place, the shouted thread counts of apprentices calling numbers across narrow streets. The weaving district was alive, as it had been alive every morning for centuries, and somewhere beneath his feet, a secret older than the district itself was waiting. He could smell indigo. Not the sharp, fresh indigo of the dye vats where apprentices stirred the fermentation pits with long wooden paddles, but a deeper, older version of the scent, settled into the stone, absorbed by decades, the smell of a place that had been steeped in the dyer's art so long that the stone itself had taken the color. The floor of the founding hall was stained blue-black in the grooves between flagstones, and the air tasted of tannin and mineral earth. Zuetta pressed her palm to the relic loom's central beam. She pushed something through the wood, not force, not weight. A frequency. Tibijia could not hear it, but he felt it in his back teeth, in the bones of his wrists, in the hollow behind his sternum where instinct lived. The Iroko beam hummed. The floor vibrated, a different vibration from the working looms above, lower, slower, the way a bridge hums differently from a drum. And a section of packed earth beneath the loom's base sank into the ground, smooth and silent, revealing a stone staircase that descended into amber-lit darkness. Zuetta swayed. The frequency she had pushed through the beam had cost her something. Tibijia saw it in the way she gripped the loom's frame for balance, the way the thread pattern bruises on her wrists flared darker for a moment, the way her breathing went shallow and controlled. The fugu's price still being paid. Still being extracted from a body that had not slept in 30 hours.
The pattern keepers maintain this entrance,
she said, stepping onto the first stair with the careful placement of someone who knows her legs may not be entirely reliable.
Mom Mariama brought me here when I was 12. She told me what was below. She said I was not ready to see it.
A pause, the sound of her bare foot on stone.
She said I would know when I was.
Are you?
Tibijia asked.
No.
She kept walking.
But my mother is dead and the pattern said to come, so here I am.
Tibijia followed, the folded map smock in one hand and his weapon in the other. The weapon was a comfort object. He knew this, acknowledged it, did not care. Whatever waited below was not the kind of problem a blade solved. But 12 years of soldiering had wired his hand to his weapon the way Mariama's hands had been wired to her shuttle, and he would no sooner descend an unknown staircase, unarmed, than he would walk into an ambush whistling. The stairs were carved from gray stone, smooth and worn. Worn by feet, thousands of feet over thousands of years, the centers of each step dished into shallow bowls by the passage of people who had walked this spiral long before the guild existed, before the looms of Tamale was a weaving district, before fugu cloth was commerce. The amber light came from the walls, veins of crystallized material running through the stone like mineral deposits in a mine face, pulsing with a slow rhythm that Tibijia could feel in his ribs, but not hear with his ears. Above them, the looms kept clacking. The sound filtered down through stone and earth, growing muffled but never disappearing entirely, a constant reminder that an entire industry operated 20 meters above a secret that would redefine it. Tibijia counted steps the way he counted paces on a march. 40, 60, 80. The temperature rose with each revolution of the spiral, the air growing warmer and denser, carrying a mineral sweetness that reminded him of the smell in Mariama's loom room after the shadow incursion, the scent of the system itself, leaking upward through stone. Mixed with it, filtering down from above, came the ghost of indigo steam from the dye vats and the warm, yeasty smell of the millet porridge that the apprentice kitchens served every morning. Two worlds, the one above, human and industrious, and the one below, ancient and luminous, sharing the same column of air. At 140 steps, the staircase ended. Tibijia stopped. His soldier's mind, which had been cataloging the descent in tactical terms, depth, width, choke points, lines of retreat, went quiet. Not from shock, from scale. The chamber was enormous. Vaulted ceiling 50 meters overhead, the stone arching upward and disappearing into darkness, punctuated by clusters of the amber crystal that veined the staircase walls. Columns rose from the floor at regular intervals, not architectural supports, but something else, something functional. Each column was a crystallized root line, rising from the ground and branching at the top into a web of luminous connections that linked it to every other column in the space. The chamber was a cathedral, not a cathedral built for worship, a cathedral built for work. The proportions were wrong for human reverence, too wide, too low relative to its breadth, the spacing between columns optimized for access rather than awe. This was a workspace, a control room, a command center designed by beings who thought in networks rather than hierarchies. Tibigia's military mind seized on the familiar. The layout was a tactical operations center. The columns were relay stations. The web of connections overhead was a communications grid. The chamber's shape, broad, accessible, every column visible from every other column, was the architecture of command and control. Whatever had been built here was built to coordinate, to process, to direct. He could map every military installation he had ever worked in onto this space. The technology was alien. The function was not. At the center stood the first loom. It was not wood. It was not metal. It was stone or crystal or something that existed on the boundary between mineral and living tissue, warm when Tibigia's knuckles brushed its frame, vibrating with a frequency so low it registered not as sound, but as the memory of sound. The frame stood 10 meters tall, 5 meters wide, and its structure was not the rectangular frame of a fugu weaving loom. It was circular. A wheel. The warp threads, if threads was the right word for lines of crystallized light suspended in air, radiated outward from a central hub like spokes, each one anchored at its far end to one of the root line columns ringing the chamber. The first loom was connected to everything. Every thread led to a column, every column led to a root line, every root line led to a grove somewhere in the territories above. Tibigia translated, this was not a weaving device. This was an interface, a terminal connected to every node in a network that spanned the entire system. In military terms, this was the command post, the place where you stood to see the whole battlefield at once. And it held a tapestry. The weft, woven between the radial warp threads in concentric circles from the center outward, was not cloth. It was light-given structure, suspended in the air between the crystallized threads like a spider's web caught in morning sun. Every strand shimmered. Every connection pulsed. And the patterns woven into the light fabric were not fugu patterns or enskinment geometry or root line frequencies or shadow binding scripts. They were all of them, together, woven into a unified script that showed, with the devastating clarity of a code finally broken, how every pattern language the factions had claimed as exclusively their own was a fragment of a single whole. Zuera made a sound. Not a word, not a gasp. A sound that came from somewhere deeper than language, from the place where belief lives before it becomes thought, where faith exists as a physical sensation in the body rather than an idea in the mind. She pressed both hands to her mouth and the sound kept coming, muffled now, her shoulders shaking, tears running through her fingers and dropping onto the stone floor where they caught the amber light and glowed for a moment before soaking into the ancient gray.
It's real.
Her voice was wrecked, broken open. She lowered her hands, and her face was not the face of the composed analyst or the hidden warrior or the grieving daughter. It was the face of a woman who had been told a story her entire life and had carried it the way you carry a lamp through a dark house, necessary, fragile, never quite certain whether the flame was real or whether you had been walking in the dark all along and only imagining the light. And now the lamp was a bonfire. Now the dark was gone. Now the story was stone and crystal and light, and it was real. It was real. Her mother had not lied. The pattern keepers had not lied. The lineage that had cost Mariama her life and Zuera her childhood, and Isahaku, his mind, had not been a beautiful delusion maintained by women who could not accept that the world was smaller than they wanted it to be.
My mother said she had been here.
Zuera's voice was thick. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, the one with the thread-pattern bruises, the geometric lines stark against her dark skin.
She said the patterns were one language. She said the factions had broken something that was meant to be whole. I believed her because she was my mother and I loved her and I wanted the story to be true.
She looked at Tibijia with eyes that were red and luminous and utterly unguarded.
It is true, every pattern I have ever studied, every cipher, every encoding, every scrap of textile magic I have spent my life learning, it all fits. It all connects, right here on this loom.
Tibijia said nothing. He was a soldier. He did not understand the patterns or the language or the factional politics of who owned which fragment of a system that predated all of them. But he understood the expression on her face because he had seen it once before on a scout who had climbed a ridge expecting an empty valley and found an army instead. The expression of someone whose map of the world had just been redrawn in real time, at scale, without their permission. He gave her the moment, then he gave her the question.
What does it say?
Zuera moved to the tapestry. She reached out and touched the light fabric, and where her fingers passed through the suspended weave, the patterns brightened, responding to her the way a dog responds to its owner's voice, recognizing something in her touch. The pattern keeper's heritage, the lineage. The light fabric knew her the way the loom room had known Mariama, the way the founding hall had known the relic loom's frequency. This place had been waiting for someone like Zuera, the way a letter waits for the person it was addressed to. She began to read. Not fluently, in pieces, fragments, her brow furrowed with concentration as she translated a unified script that no living person had been trained to read as a whole. She moved around the circular loom, tracing the concentric rings of weft from the outer edge inward, each ring older than the last, each layer of the tapestry a chapter in a history that spanned millennia.
The outer ring is recent, relatively.
She was speaking to herself as much as to Tibijia, processing aloud.
This section describes the fragmentation when the factions took their pieces of the language and severed the connections to the whole. This was deliberate, not an accident, not a war, a decision. The factions chose to separate because...
She paused, reading more carefully.
Because something threatened the unified system, something tried to control it, to cage it.
She moved inward. The patterns grew denser, the encoding more complex, the light brighter.
The middle rings are the history, construction of the system, the beings who built it, the Zagale, their name, their actual name.
She touched a pattern sequence, and the crystallized threads hummed.
They were not human, the proportions of this chamber, I said the ceiling was wrong. The spacing, it was built for beings who were wider than us, broader, who moved differently.
Tibijia thought of the word Zagale in his mouth, the angular syllables, the jaw that fought him. A word made for a mouth shaped differently than his. Zuera reached the inner rings, the oldest layer, the heart of the tapestry, and here she stopped, her hand resting on a section near the boundary between the historical layers and something else. A final ring woven at the very center, distinct from the rest, its patterns threaded with veins of black that ran through the light fabric like cracks through glass.
This is not history,
she said, her voice had changed, quieter, harder.
This is a design specification.
A what?
The Zagale did not predict the future, they engineered a response to it.
She traced the dark-veined patterns with her fingertip, reading fragments that Tibijia could see she was assembling in real time, fitting pieces together the way his scouts fit terrain features into tactical pictures.
After the ceiling, after they went below and locked themselves away, they added this final layer. Through the root line connections from beneath the earth after they were already gone. They anticipated that the factions might not just fragment the system but that someone might try to reassemble it by force. To cage the fragments instead of reunifying them.
A fail-safe.
Yes.
She closed her eyes, placed both palms flat on the light fabric. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on the cadence of translation. each phrase arriving slightly after the reading, the way a translator at a diplomatic meeting speaks a half-beat behind the original.
When the cage maker returns, the one who breaks the system to remake it in his image, the four must converge.
She paused, read again. Each fragment arriving like a piece of a puzzle laid on a table, its position in the whole not yet clear.
The rejected one who carries the shadow of the true binding.
Another pause, her brow furrowed deeper.
The listener who hears the voice beneath the earth.
A longer pause. Her hands moved on the light fabric, searching for the next piece.
The last pattern which shows the way to the heart of the system.
She opened her eyes, looked at the folded map smock in Tibigia's hand.
And the candidate who holds the key to reunification.
The words hung in the amber light. Tibigia heard them the way he heard a field briefing, mapping positions, counting forces, calculating distances. 4 roles, 4 assets, 1 threat, 1 objective. The mystical language was window dressing. Underneath it, this was an operations order written by beings who knew exactly what they were planning for.
The rejected one.
He said,
Someone denied the enskinment, carrying an unauthorized shadow binding.
Yes.
The listener, deeper range root line communion than standard Tindana capability.
Yes.
The last pattern.
He held up the map smock.
Mariama's message, her final encoding, it brought us here.
Yes.
And the candidate, someone who found the Zagale's training system, the protocol, and is being prepared to operate the unified language.
Zuera nodded slowly.
The tapestry describes the protocol, a sealed environment in the deep system designed to identify and train a candidate for reunification. The candidate receives the knowledge of the unified language and the ability to rebind what the factions separated.
Tibigia looked at the tapestry. Thousands of years of history woven in light. A failsafe designed by beings who were not human, activated by a threat they had foreseen millennia before it arrived. 4 strangers who did not know each other, described not by name but by function, converging on a deadline that was, he calculated, 4 days away. He had come to the looms of Tamale to investigate a weaver's death. He was standing in an underground command center, looking at an operations order written before the first human had touched a loom.
The cage maker.
He said,
The threat the failsafe was built to stop, who is it?
Zuera moved to a section of the tapestry where the patterns were not amber but sick, threaded with black veins that pulsed with a rhythm different from the rest, arrhythmic, wrong, the way a healthy heartbeat sounds wrong when you speed it up and strip it of its pauses. The corruption was visible in the light fabric, spreading from a single point of origin, branching through the root line connections the way poison branches through a water table.
Someone who has already begun.
Her voice was careful, precise, laying facts down like stones across a river.
Someone rewriting the enskinment pattern to concentrate the system's power in a single vessel. Someone wearing the Zagale's own substance, their obsidian, their crystal, as a second skin.
She looked at Tibigia.
The cage maker does not want to destroy the system. The cage maker wants to become it.
The shadows at Mariama's door. The incursion that had dissolved the textile ward. The presence that had killed a master weaver without leaving a mark on her body and hollowed out a guard's mind like a gourd scraped clean.
The cage maker has been here.
Tibigia said, not a question.
Yes, looking for the same thing the pattern led us to. The first loom, the unified language, the tapestry.
Zuera's expression was grim.
Mom Mariama died keeping this hidden. The pattern's self-protection, the cipher, the memory erasure, the self-completing weave, all of it was designed to ensure that the map reached the right hands before the cage maker found the entrance.
And now we have 4 days.
The Damba alignment. The tapestry specifies convergence at the alignment, the point when the system's connections are strongest, when the root lines resonate at their deepest frequency. The failsafe requires all 4 to be present. The rejected one, the listener, the last pattern, the candidate.
How do we find 3 people we have never met and do not know exist?
Zuera turned back to the tapestry. She placed both hands on the light fabric and closed her eyes. The pattern keeper's connection activated. Every pattern in the tapestry blazed simultaneously, the unified script burning bright enough to cast sharp shadows from the root line columns, and through those columns, through the network that connected the first loom to every grove and root line in the territories, she sent a signal. Not a message, not words, a frequency. The specific harmonic that the fail-safe section of the tapestry vibrated at, a sound below hearing, a vibration below feeling, recognizable only to 3 people in the world. The rejected one, whose unauthorized shadow would resonate with it. The listener, whose impossible depth would detect it. The candidate, whose protocol training would decode it. The signal carried one word. Zagale. The first loom hummed. The root line columns pulsed. Above them, the working looms of the weaving district clattered on, 100 weavers passing shuttles through warp and pressing weft into place, oblivious to the ancient machine beneath their feet that was doing the same thing at a scale that made their craft look like children drawing in sand. Somewhere in the territories, in an enskinment chamber, in a crystallized grove, in a sealed dome beneath the earth, 3 people felt a vibration they could not explain and understood a word they had never been taught. Zagale, the woven ones, the system calling its defenders home. 4 days,